Clearly, what is needed is a realistic understanding by both producers and consumers about the limits of intelligence, what it can and cannot do. As a former senior analyst explained to the Select Committee, footnote 10, what intelligence can do is to follow the behavior of foreign leaders and groups over a long period of time in order to get a sense of the parameters within which their policies move. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 10. Huizenga, January 26, 76, page 24. Resuming the reading. American policymakers are not then likely to be greatly surprised by foreign behavior, even though intelligence analysts might not be able to predict precise intentions at any given moment with respect to a given situation. Nor can analysts be expected to predict human events when often the actors themselves do not know in advance what they will do. As the Schlesinger report said, in a world of perfect information, there would be no uncertainties about the present and future intentions, capabilities, and activities of foreign powers. Information, however, is bound to be imperfect for the most part. Consequently, the intelligence community can at best reduce the uncertainties and construct plausible hypotheses about these factors on the basis of what continues to be partial and often conflicting evidence. Footnote 11. Schlesinger Report, page 10a. To expect more may be to court disappointment. Despite this recognition on the part of many policymakers, if analysis is not correct, there is often the charge of an, quote, intelligence failure, end quote. Good intelligence or accurate predictions cannot insure against bad policy in any case. For example, as the current Deputy Director for Intelligence maintains, the pessimistic CIA estimates on Vietnam had little or no effect on U.S. policy decisions there. Vietnam may have been a policy failure. End of page 270, beginning page 271. It was not an intelligence failure. Footnote 12. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 12. Staff summary of Edward Proctor interview, May 16, 75. Resuming the reading. Similarly, the United States had intelligence on the possibility of a Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974. The problem of taking effective action to prevent such an invasion was a policy question and not an intelligence failure. Section E, the personnel system. To some extent, problems in the quality of the analytical performance of the intelligence community are simply in the nature of things. The collection function lends itself to technical and managerial approaches, while the analytical job is more dependent on the intangibles of brain power. In the final analysis, the intelligence product can only be as good as the people who produce it. The CIA prides itself on the qualifications of its analysts. The agency's exemption from civil service constraints, unlike the DIA, for example, has enabled the DDI to attract the best analysts in the community. Nevertheless, those in the highest positions in the CIA have traditionally come from the operations side of the agency. The agency's promotion system is structured in such a way that the most outstanding, lower-level people are singled out for advancement into managerial positions. Such a system works well for the purposes of the Directorate of Operations, where the skills necessary for good management are essentially the same as those required of a good case officer. But when applied to the DDI, that system encourages the best analysts to assume supervisory positions, reducing the time available to utilize their analytical skills. Although the CIA has several hundred, quote, super grade, end quote, positions, footnote 13, and very few government agencies are permitted so high a number, there are virtually no, quote, super grade, end quote, slots, which involve only or even primarily analytic responsibilities. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 13. John Clark Testimony, February 4th, 76, page 37. Resuming the reading. The agency maintains that DDI supervisors are indeed analysts, since they review and critique the work of junior analysts. In this view, supervisory positions amplify the analytical capabilities of senior personnel. Thus, there is not, quote, supervision, end quote, in the usual sense by DDI supervisors. They are viewed as participants in the analytical process. Footnote 14. Proctor, Staff Summary, March 1st, 76. The Office of National Estimates was the only place where a regular arrangement for high-level analysts existed, but that office was abolished in 1973. Today, only the DDI's Office of Political Research, OPR, has been able to retain several supergrade staffers who do only analysis out of a staff of about 40 to 50 analysts. The Office of Political Research, created only in 1974, is treated by the DDI as an elite group. Much of its work is interdisciplinary in nature. The emphasis is placed on keeping the Office of Political Research analysts out of everyday routine of requests for current intelligence work, which can be performed by other offices in the Directorate. Footnote 15. Reading footnote 15. IBID. Resuming the reading. Some analysts complain that the personnel system has fostered too much bureaucratic, quote, layering, end quote, and that there are too many people writing reports about reports. The effects are predictable. In the words of the former Director of Central Intelligence and Secretary of Defense, James Schlesinger, quote, if you've, end of page 271, beginning page 272, got too much specialization and pigeonholing of people, you get the kind of people in the intelligence game who don't mind being pigeonholed, and the entire U.S. intelligence establishment is too much bureaucratized, end quote. Footnote 16. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 16. James Schlesinger Testimony, February 2nd, 76, page 72. Resuming the reading. The intelligence community, IC staff, in its post-mortem of major U.S. intelligence failures, has pointed in all cases to the shortage of talented personnel. As the former deputy head of the intelligence community staff pointed out to the Select Committee in his testimony, quote, giving people more flexibility in pay scale and so forth doesn't always guarantee that they hire the right people, end quote. Footnote 17. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 17. Clark, February 5th, 76, page 38. Resuming the reading. Section F. Recruitment and training of analysts. The agency tends to bring analysts in early in their professional life, emphasizing lifetime careers in intelligence work and development of institutional commitment. There has traditionally been minimal lateral entry of established analysts and experts into the profession at middle and upper levels, more in DDS and T than in DDI. Footnote 18. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 18. In FY 1975, 18 analysts out of 105 hired from outside the CIA by the DDI were at GS 12 to 15. Resuming the reading. This might be characterized as the, quote, Kraft Guild, end quote, approach to intelligence, where recruits are brought in to serve their apprenticeships within the ranks of the profession. Footnote 19. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 19. Marshall Staff Summary, February 10, 76. Resuming the reading. Specialized analytical training for intelligence analysts is quite limited. The CIA's Office of Training, OTR, has a program in methodology and research techniques and a variety of mid-career courses and senior seminars. About 25% of the DDI personnel who receive in-house training are in management and executive development courses. Various DDI offices sponsor courses on specific skills such as computers and statistics. Footnote 20. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 20. Proctor, Staff Summary, March 1st, 76. Resuming the reading. For the most part, in the past, the agency-run courses available were oriented toward developing skills necessary for clandestine activity. According to Schlesinger, within the CIA, most of the training effort in the past has gone into training operators rather than training analysts. Footnote 21. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 21. Schlesinger, February 2nd, 76, page 27. Resuming the reading. Agency maintains there is now an increased emphasis on the development of sophisticated analytical skills and understanding. Most of the substantive training for intelligence analysts takes place outside the agency, both in academic institutions and in other government departments. Of the total number of DDI personnel participating in such external training in FY 1975, about 1/4 were involved in training courses longer than 6 weeks in duration. Section G, the intelligence culture and analytical bias. There is a set of problems stemming from what might be called the intelligence, quote, culture, end quote, a particular outlook sometimes attributed to the analysts, which tend to affect the overall quality of judgment reflected in their work. Although the problem of preconceptions is one of the most intractable in intelligence analysis, it clearly is one. End of page 272, beginning page 273, of the most critical, and has been a focal point of the IC staff post-mortems. As one former senior official told the Select Committee, quote, by and large, good intelligence production should be as free as possible from ideological biases, and the higher the degree of ideological bias, the greater will be the blind spots, end quote. Footnote 22. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 22. IBID. Resuming the reading. Among the examples of analytical/intellectual bias and preconceptions are the following. In 1962, some CIA analysts judged that the Soviets would not put missiles into Cuba because such a move would be, quote, aberrational, end quote. Footnote 23. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 23. IBID, excuse me, Huizenga, January 26, 76, page 25. Resuming the reading. In 1973, most of the intelligence community was disposed to believe that the Arabs were unlikely to resort to war against Israel, because to do so would be, quote, irrational, end quote, in light of relative Arab-Israeli military capabilities. Footnote 24. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 24. IC staff post-mortem on 1973 Middle East War, January 1974, page 14. Resuming the reading. The same mechanism operated the inability to foresee critical events in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary. During the Cyprus crisis in the summer of 1974, according to the IC staff post-mortem of that episode, the CIA analysts were again prey to the perhaps subconscious conviction and hope that ultimately reason and rationality will prevail, that apparently irrational moves, the Arab attack, the Greek-sponsored coup, will not be made by essentially rational men. Footnote 25. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 25. IC staff post-mortem on 1974 Cyprus crisis, page 4. Resuming the reading. The charge is frequently made that intelligence estimates issued by the Defense Department and the military services are not wholly objective, since those groups have particular departmental interests and programs to advocate. By contrast, the CIA is supposed to be free from such bias. But although the DDI is not in the position of having to defend budgetary items or particular weapon systems in the view of other parts of the intelligence community, there has been a tendency for a CIA institutional bias to develop over time. The committee notes that some observers have pointed to a CIA, quote, line, end quote, on certain issues. Footnote 25a. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 25a. See Chapter 5, pages 76 to 77. Resuming the reading. Section H. The nature of the Pentagon process, the nature of the production process. Consensus versus competition. The nature of the production process can itself undermine the quality of the product. That process is census-oriented, varying in degree from the formal United States Intelligence Board, USIB, coordination involved in producing a national intelligence estimate, footnote 26, to the less structured daily analyst-to-analyst coordination, which takes place at the working level. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 26. Prior to the President's February 1976 reorganization of the intelligence community, the USIB approved all national intelligence estimates. See the chapter of this report on, quote, the Director of Central Intelligence, end quote, page 74 FF, for a fuller discussion of the estimates coordination process. Resuming the reading. For the monographs produced on an irregular basis by the intelligence directorates, research offices, the bulk of the coordination effort between these offices, although occasionally such coordination will cross directorate lines, and less frequently it will involve going outside the agency. An analyst from the DDI may meet with his opposite members in state or DIA prior to, end of page 273, beginning page 274. publishing an article in their mutual field. Footnote 27. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 27. Quote, the Directorate of Intelligence, end quote, Annex A, page 2. Resuming the reading. The coordination process, however, necessary and desirable, may tend to produce a, quote, reinforcing consensus, end quote, whereby divergent views of individual analysts can become, quote, submerged in a sea of conventional collective wisdom, end quote, and doubts or disagreements can simply disappear in the face of mutually reinforcing agreements. Footnote 28. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 28. IC staff post-mortem on the 1973 Middle East War, page 18. Resuming the reading. Although the purpose of coordination is, quote, to assure that the facts and judgments presented therein are as comprehensible, objective, and accurate as possible, end quote, footnote 29, it sometimes has the unfortunate side effect of blurring both the form and the content of the product. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 29. Quote, the Directorate of Intelligence, end quote, Annex A, page 1. Resuming the reading. The national intelligence estimates have been criticized on occasion for this. The estimates undergo the most formal coordination process, one of which is integral to policy consensus building. Some consumers complain that finished intelligence frequently lacks clarity, especially clarity of judgment, and that it is often presented in waffly or, quote, Delphic, end quote, forms, without attribution of views. Opposing views are not always clearly articulated. Judgments on difficult subjects are sometimes hedged or represent the outcome of compromise and are couched in fuzzy, imprecise terms. Yet intelligence consumers increasingly maintain that they want a more clearly spelled out distinction between different interpretations with judgments as to relative possibilities. In fact, the issue of consensus versus competition in analysis represents a persistent conceptual dilemma for the intelligence community. Policymakers tend to want one, quote, answer, end quote, to an intelligence question, but at the same time, they do not want anything to be hidden from them. Consumer needs can change drastically in a short period of time, and the same policymakers may need different kinds of intelligence for different kinds of situations. Some members of the intelligence and foreign policy communities today argue that the consensus approach to intelligence production has improperly come to substitute for competing centers of analysis which could deliver more and different interpretations on the critical questions, on which only partial data is available. This conceptual conflict should be closely examined by the successor Oversight Committee. Section I, the, quote, current events, end quote, syndrome. The task of producing intelligence, analyzing day-to-day events for quick dissemination, today occupies much of the resources of the DDI. Responding to the growing demands for information of current concern by policymakers for more coverage of more topics, the DDI has of necessity resorted to a, quote, current events, end quote, approach to much of its research. There is less interest in and fewer resources have been devoted to in-depth analysis of problems with long-range importance to policymakers. The Directorate has had to devote considerable resources in order to keep up on a day-to-day basis with events as they happen. To some extent, analysts feel they must compete for timeliness with the considerable amount of raw reporting which reaches consumers. End of page 274. Beginning page 275. According to some observers, this syndrome has had an unfavorable impact on the quality of crisis warning and the recognition of longer-term trends. The, quote, current events, end quote, approach has fostered the problem of, quote, incremental analysis, end quote, the tendency to focus myopically on the latest piece of information without systematic consideration of an accumulated body of integrated evidence. Analysts, in their haste to compile the day's traffic, tend to lose sight of an underlying factors and relationships. Footnote 30. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 30. CIC staff postmortems on Middle East war and Cyprus crisis. Resuming the reading. For example, the 1966 Cunningham report points out that the CIA's sinologists were so immersed in the large volume of daily FBIS, footnote 31, and other source reports on the communist China in the early 1960s, that they failed to consider adequately the broader question of the slowly developing Sino-Soviet dispute. Footnote 32. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 31. The Foreign Broadcast Information Service, run by the Intelligence Directorate, monitors foreign media and open source material and publishes daily surveys by area. Reading footnote 32. CIA Inspector General, quote, Foreign Intelligence Collection Requirements, end quote. December 1966. The Cunningham Report. Pages 8 through 13, 14. Resuming the reading. The Intelligence Directorate is now turning more attention to such increasingly important long-term and interdisciplinary problems as world food balances, raw material supplies, population pressures, and pollution of the environment. Nevertheless, the DDI itself feels that an even greater effort should be made in these areas. Quote, such matters have not been the focus of national security interest in the past, but they clearly will be within the next 10 years, and this directorate should be building its capacity to analyze and report in these fields. End quote. Footnote 33. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 33. Quote, the Directorate of Intelligence, end quote, page 12. Resuming the reading. Section J, Innovation. The CIA is thought by many observers to be technologically one of the most innovative research centers in the country, and it allocates considerable funds to continue the search for new technology. But despite recent increases, the intelligence community still expends relatively little effort on R&D in the analytical field, in contrast to intensive effort in new and costly collection methods. The analytic community has suffered from the secrecy that surrounds the work of the intelligence community as a whole. This insulation is recognized to have had a detrimental effect on the quality of analysis. The agency recognizes the need for conducting a free exchange with academics, contractors, and consultants. For example, in FY 1976, 17 analysts were on leave at private institutions, with an additional 14 people in various government programs, e.g., the State Department Senior Seminar or the Congressional Fellows Program. Footnote 34. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 34. Proctor, Staff Summary, March 1st, 76. Resuming the reading. Some DDI offices have panels of consultants, outsiders, to review major papers, and outside speakers are on occasion brought in for special seminars. There have been efforts like the one made by OPR to arrange for 1-year sabbaticals for visiting academics, during which the visitor could produce both government and public papers. Such efforts have been only partially successful. End of page 275, beginning page 276. The question of CIA relations with academics and private groups, like foundations and research organizations, is a controversial one. Footnote 35. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 35. See Chapter 10 of this report on the CIA's relations with these groups in support of intelligence collection and covert action. Resuming the reading. The committee notes the desirability of a more open attitude on both sides, one which both recognizes the legitimacy of the analytic work of the intelligence community and refrains from the secret use of academics and others for operational purposes. Section K. Overload on analysis and consumers. Few observers would dispute the fact that as consumer demands have grown and the amount of data collected has burgeoned, the analysis workload has become a serious problem. But 10 years ago, the Cunningham Report expressed the concern that, in the long run, it is not the crude question of workload which matters most, nor even the point that each item uses up customers' time and attention which cannot be given to any other item, so that each of our products must receive steadily less. What matters most is the question of whether this quantity of information is degrading the quality of all our work. Footnote 36. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 36. Cunningham Report, page 8 to 13. Resuming the reading. And the 1971 Schlesinger Report said that it was, quote, not at all clear that our hypotheses about foreign intentions, capabilities, and activities have improved commensurately in scope and quality as more data comes in from modern collection methods, end quote. Footnote 37. Schlesinger Report, page 10a. Resuming the reading. Yet today, the intelligence establishment remains structured in such a way that collection guides production, rather than vice versa. Available data and, quote, the impetus of technology, end quote, tend to govern what is produced. Footnote 38. IBID, page 10a. Resuming the reading. To be sure, much of the proliferation in data collected has proven invaluable to the analytical effort. Technical collection systems have proved, quote, hard, end quote, data, e.g., on missile silos, which have contributed to the generally acknowledged high quality of CIA assessments of Soviet and Chinese strategic forces. In 1971, the Schlesinger Report said, quote, it has become commonplace to translate product criticism into demands for enlarged collection efforts. Seldom does anyone ask if a further reduction in uncertainty, however small, is worth its cost, end quote. Footnote 39. IBID, page 11. The community's heavy emphasis on collection is itself detrimental to correcting product problems. Said the report, for each department or agency sees the maintenance and expansion of collection capabilities as their route to survival and strength within the community. There is a, quote, strong presumption, end quote, that additional data collection rather than improved analysis will provide answers to particular intelligence problems. Footnote 40. IBID, page 11. Analysts naturally attempt to read all the relevant raw data reports on the subjects they are working on, for fear of missing an important piece of information. The Cunningham report referred to this as the end of page 276, beginning page 277, quote, jigsaw theory, end quote, of intelligence. That one little scrap might be the missing piece. Footnote 41. Cunningham report, page 8 to 19. The present trend within the DDI is to reduce the amount of raw data coming to analysts by more effective screening processes. In the opinion of one intelligence community official, analysts in the future are going to have to rely to a greater extent than heretofore on others' judgments. The collectors themselves may have to present their output in summary form, with some means of highlighting important information. Footnote 42. Staff summary of Richard Shryock interview, February 10, 76. Despite the community's sensitivity to the distinction between, quote, raw, end quote, and, quote, finished, end quote, intelligence reporting, on the other hand, consumers tend to treat the intelligence product as a free good. Instead of articulating priorities, they demand information about everything, and the demand exceeds the supply. And analysts, perhaps for fear of being accused of an, quote, intelligence failure, end quote, feel that they have to cover every possible topic with little regard for its relevance to U.S. foreign policy interests. The community must part with the notion that it has to beat the newspapers in reporting coups in remote areas of the world if what happens in those areas is only of marginal interest to U.S. policymakers. In this regard, there are serious efforts being made by DDI to focus analysis on major areas of importance to the United States. The community has looked increasingly to the advent of automated information handling systems to solve the problems of systems overload. But the impact of computerization is not yet clear. In 1966, the Cunningham report warned that, quote, great technological advances in storage and retrieval, end quote, of information can do more harm than good if, quote, drastically higher standards, end quote, for what is to be stored and retrieved are not instituted. Footnote 43. Cunningham report, page 7 to 12. Footnote. It has been often pointed out that not only are analysts swamped with information, but the consumers are also inundated with intelligence reporting, both, quote, finished, end quote, and, quote, raw, end quote. The volume of paper degrades the overall effectiveness of the product, since there is simply too much to read from too many sources. In addition to the daily DDI publications and the various DDI offices, specialized weeklies, and other memoranda, a variety of other intelligence publications regularly cross the desks of senior government officials. As former Director of Central Intelligence, Richard Helms has told the Select Committee, it seems to me that one of the things that's tended to happen is that almost every agency has got to have its national publication. In other words, it's got to have a publication that arrives in the White House every morning. Footnote 44. Richard Helms' testimony, January 30, 76. page 29. Policymakers receive DIA's Defense Intelligence Notes, DINs, produced on particular subjects as the occasion demands, sometimes several per day on a given topic. NSA sends out a daily SIGINT summary, which is not classified as finished intelligence, and a considerable, end of page 277, beginning page 278, amount of raw reporting of clandestine human source intelligence is routinely distributed to consumers on the NSC staff, at the Departments of State and Defense, and in military services. This glut of paper raises a number of issues which the Select Committee feels deserves further attention. The proliferation of departmental publications tends to undermine the centralized nature of the system for the production of national intelligence. It contributes to confusion rather than clarity in the decision-making process, since different publications often present different conclusions. Often, the reasons for the differences are only clear to a sophisticated intelligence analyst, and direct reporting from the collectors usually arrives before the analytical reporting can, preempting the analyst's work in evaluating the data. Section L, Quality Control. In 1972, a, quote, Product Review Division, end quote, PRD, was established within the intelligence community staff. It has the task of regularly appraising intelligence articles and studies, quote, testing them for objectivity, balance, and responsiveness, end quote. Footnote 45. Shryock Staff Summary, February 10, 76. The Intelligence Directorate has no formal or independent system for quality control, depending instead upon its regular review and coordination process. Footnote 46. Proctor, Staff Summary, March 1st, 76. Most of the PRD's attention to date has been directed to the conduct of community-wide post-mortems on particular crises. For example, the 1973 Middle East War, the Cyprus crisis in 1974, the Indian nuclear detonation, and the Mayaguez incident. The division was involved in changing the old daily Central Intelligence Bulletin from a CIA publication into a community publication, now called the National Intelligence Bulletin. PRD participated in discussions leading to the transformation of the Old Watch Committee into the Director of Central Intelligence's Special Assistant for Warning, with a strategic warning staff. PRD has not yet been significantly involved in the development of new analytical methods, in resource allocation for production elements, or in training or recruitment issues. Contact with the consumers of the intelligence product has been on an irregular basis, mostly for post-mortems, although PRD is currently at work through the NIOs, collecting consumer reactions on particular papers of concern to the United States Intelligence Board. The division has no authority to order changes in the management of production, which might affect the quality of the product. Rather, it has been in the position of making recommendations to the USIB and encouraging their implementation. Section M, Consumer Guidance and Evaluation. The DDI manages its production planning by compiling a quarterly production and a quarterly research schedule, outlining those finished intelligence studies slated for publication in the following 3 months, as well as projects which support other intelligence efforts, but which may not be published. Quarterly schedules are prepared by DDI's executive staff based on inputs received from end of page 278, beginning page 279. Each office within the Intelligence Directorate and the Associate DDI reviews them to ensure that the planned projects are responsive to consumer needs. Footnote 47. Quote, the Directorate of Intelligence. End quote, page 8. While there is no formal or institutionalized review by consumers of the quarterly schedules, there are frequent directorate-level contacts with policymakers who express an interest in intelligence formation and assessments on particular foreign policy issues. Evaluation of the intelligence product by the consumers themselves is virtually non-existent. The NSC Intelligence Committee, which was supposed to perform that function, was largely inactive and has now been abolished in the President's reorganization plans. Rarely, if ever, do high officials take the time to review the product carefully with the analysts and explain to them how the product could be improved and made more useful to policymakers. The intelligence community then made more useful to The intelligence community then, by default, evaluates its own performance without the benefit of any real feedback. One former senior analyst told the Select Committee, I believe there ought to be requirements on the policy side to respond by comment or otherwise to major intelligence products, obviously not the whole flow of stuff, and I think that there ought to be a responsibility at an appropriate level, say at an assistant secretary level, to do this, and at the NSC level. This kind of recognition, the sense of participation in a serious process, is, I think, the best thing that can be done for analysts. Footnote 48. Hui Zhenge, January 26, 76, page 23. Section N. The Congressional Role. Congress does not at present receive national intelligence estimates, although some of the estimative material is presented to the Congress in occasional briefings by intelligence officials. In the past, the Senate Foreign Relations and Armed Services Committees received the national intelligence daily, which could be cut off at executive will, and has been on some occasions, most recently in January 1976. Footnote 49. Lawrence Stern, quote, CIA stops sending daily report to Hill, end quote. Washington Post, February 4th, 76. In 1975, the DDI began publishing a daily intelligence checklist, specifically tailored to what it perceived to be the intelligence needs of the Congress. With the resurgence of an active congressional role in the foreign and national security policy-making process, comes the need for members to receive high-quality, reliable, and timely information on which to base congressional decisions and actions. Access to the best available intelligence product should be insisted upon by the legislative branch. Precisely what kinds of intelligence the Congress requires to better perform its constitutional responsibilities remains to be worked out between the two branches of government. But the Select Committee believes that the need for information and the right to it is clear. End of page 279, beginning page 280. And I am going to stop here for this recording.